about. I've been getting a number of comments on the videos from different people that's been telling me different things to try, such as putting the video camera in different positions and not hold the same scenes along, and to bringing more close-ups in. And I'm trying them all, but I want y'all to know I'm making these videos more on a entertaining value of such as it's more or less a one-on-one type of interview. In other words, I'm making them more or less for you to sit and view them and understand them and to watch them. I'm not making them more or less for an entertaining value of sitting around having a bunch of friends over watching the video. In other words, I feel like I'm making them more on a one-on-one basis and talking to you more on the terms of one-on-one. We kind of live a little slow out in this area of Texas. This area that I live in is a very country area. It's what they call the country hick redneck area of Texas. It's the blackland area of Texas that runs right through the center of Texas. It's more or less farming people that always lived on this blackland. And they call the farming people the rednecks of Texas. And most of us grow beards later in life in such a way as we'll grow them all year, and then we'll cut them and trim them up once a year, and that's usually in the early spring or sometime in the spring. And then we'll let them grow all the way around to the next spring, cut them again. But the ones of us who have to work in town and be around a lot of people and everything and maintain jobs and everything, they don't usually get to grow a beard a year. They just get to grow a beard a short time each year, and then they cut it off. But it's just sort of our lifestyle and our way we live out in here. And we're going to talk about conditioning in such a way as I like to have something around me, you know, when we talk about conditioning and everything. And I went and got a couple of collars here. I'll hold them up and see if you can see them. These are working collars. They're a little wide, and then they narrow up here, and they narrow down here, and they're wide here. And this one here, just real soft. I keep them all regularly. But they worked a lot of dogs. I've had about 7 or 8 or 10 of these collars at one time, but these two here is the only ones I've got left. This one here, it's my oldest one. It says my name on there, and then it says win and lose, which I never did fill in. But they can really bring back the memories when we go to talking about conditioning and everything. Conditioning is such a subject that it's very, you learn a lot of understanding in such a way as you can devote it to your knowledge of conditioning your own body as to when you're conditioning a dog's body. You can see such a difference in the dogs when you condition them one way or another. And such things as when you change their feed, when you hit a different stroke in the conditioning as to you change a little something here, you change a little something there and everything. With the dog's body, you can just actually see the change being made when you pay close attention to it that way. And over the years, I conditioned lots of dogs, and I learned over the years as to a way of living in a cycle, and such as year after year maintaining my body in the way of conditioning it. Now you see, I haven't worked a job since 1972. I've lived right here at my house and lived from what I've survived off of these dogs with. And I was able to do the things with my body as to conditioning and everything, and doing what I wanted to do with it, and I didn't have to worry about going to town and working 8 or 9 hours there to make a living. So it gave me a little better chance. I take vitamins here. I've got 5 different kinds of vitamins here that I take, that I learned to take from the vitamins that I give my dogs when I was conditioning my dogs. Vitamins is a very important supplement that you need to feed the dogs when you're conditioning them. Vitamins is, there's different vitamins that you can give that when you're not giving them, you can pay attention to the dogs and the way the dogs condition themselves, where the amount of energy they expend, the whole works about them. And then you give the vitamins, and then you can automatically see a change within a week's time. When you start giving vitamins, you can automatically see a change in the dog's body as to what those vitamins do to it. You can see the same thing when you're paying attention to it as to the way you change the feed from one item to another item, and as to the different kinds of meat that you feed. You can see a change in their body. So when you learn all these things, you more or less, you think about it when you're thinking about your own body. And you learn such an understanding from conditioning a dog's body as to health, and conditioning plays a major role. Now, when the man's conditioning his own body, it's not like putting his body in conditioning for a battle with another man. It's like putting your body in conditioning of health, that your mind will work real good. In other words, and you'll be able to understand more clear into what you're trying to understand. In other words, it's like a good, healthy body in a good, strong condition, healthy body is a good frame of mind. It works together. And so over the years, I paid a lot of attention to that. I got to where that I would make my garden bigger each year, to spend more time out there and with a hoe. And if any of you know what it's like to have a big garden, spend a lot of time hoeing, spend a lot of time bending over and planting the seeds and harvesting the plants and everything, your body gets in many different positions. And you really condition all different parts of your body when you're a farmer, in such a way as tending to the land and tilling the land and growing plants and everything. And over the time, I have a lake about 1.5 miles, 2 miles here from my place, and we got to where we would go down there and spend so many hours a day, maybe 3 days a week, swimming. And we got where that each year build our bodies a little stronger to a cycle of like 7 years. In the 7th year, you don't do nothing but just kick back and rest. And you don't work a garden, you don't do nothing but just kick back and rest and eat and gain weight and everything. And right now, I'm to the part of where I've just passed through my 7th year. And my weight is heavier than it's been in 7 years, which I'll start back in and doing the garden again next year, and doing a little more, and watching my food, the way I eat and everything, and taking care of my body, and start exercising a little more next year. Then the next year I'll do it a little more than I did last year. And you increase it to a part of where you hit about that 6th or 7th year, and you got your body pulled good down tight, and no fat and everything in your body and everything, and the difference you feel is amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. And then you hit that 7th year cycle, and you rest, and you just start it all over again. You change it up and go from one era to another era, just in a cycle with your body. And I learned most about it from the conditioning that I did with the dogs. You know, the different things that you can see on the different dogs while you're conditioning them. It's just absolutely amazing. You'll see so much when you're conditioning a dog's body. It's like a dog is such an animal that a man can get closer with a dog than he can a horse or a cow or a rabbit or whatever, a chicken or whatever. The dog has a closeness that man can understand more when he's experimenting with different things with the dog, and such as conditioning the dog for running, conditioning the dog for almost any event. You can really understand the dog. I think like conditioning a dog is, you could put a dog's body in condition, much higher peak of conditioning than you can put your own body in. It's a lot easier to be able to do something to another body than it is to do something to your own body. I mean, hey, there ain't nothing any tougher, I'm telling you, than when you start into a battle with your own body, your own self, and trying to overcome your own self. And that's like when you got to control your cigarettes, control your drinkings, control your coffee, your tea, your gravy and your biscuits and your chocolate cake, your ice cream, and all of this business, and your drugs and whatever. You got to fight yourself and control your body to the part of where that you are stronger than yourself. You have to prove to yourself that you can control yourself. Believe me, hey, it ain't easy. It ain't easy. When you get into that battle with yourself, it becomes so interesting. And it's a match that's similar to seeing two deep game dogs put in tip-top condition and matched against one another. That's what a match is like when you're matched into yourself and trying to overcome yourself in such a way as making yourself right, your body right and everything, so everything will be clicking right. It's like these videos in a sense. Y'all got to understand now. I mean, you know, I'm a country hick type of person, and now I'm making these videos. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of mistakes, and there's going to be all kinds of different things. I just got to kind of learn it as we go. I haven't got any help here running the camera or anything like that. I'm doing it all myself here, and I've got all kinds of friends that they're all coming with different suggestions. Well, you need to do this and you need to do that and everything. I got an Indian friend out in California, out in Los Angeles. He's more business than a Jewish businessman in the city of New York, and that's business. I mean, that's a businessman. And this Indian, he's real business. I call him Chief. Y'all might know him as Indian Sonny. But he's been telling me a number of different things that I should do with this video in a way that he's interesting to listen to, and he's got some real good ideas and everything, but it's just like I'm trying to tell you. I'm going to keep on trying to do the different things and everything. But you got to remember, hey, I'm a country guy. I mean, you know, I'm not educated for this. This is why I want to let you know this is a one-on-one affair. You know, where that I'm going to be telling you stories about different things and sharing with you the different things I've got. I've got absolutely hundreds and hundreds of these little tape gazettes like this. These are of all the different matches that was through the 70s. I recorded them on a tape recorder and at Pittside, and had a minute-by-minute description of the match as it took place. Now, I say minute-by-minute, it wasn't actually minute-by-minute. It would go on like for 5 minutes, and I would cut it on and say for the last 5 minutes the dogs have been doing this, one dog is doing this, the other dog is doing that and everything, and then I'll cut back on another 5 minutes and give the time and tell what's been taking place for the last while. And on a lot of them, different ones walk by and they'll take the microphone or the tape and they'll say, well, I think the dogs are this way and that way and this way, and they'll give their opinion of the fact what is going on. Well, these different people are known people, such as Indian Sonny, Maurice Carver, Bobby Hall, Frank Fitzwater, just a number of different ones over the years picked up that microphone and would give their comments on the dogs that was being matched. And I'm going to be playing some of those. I'm just going to try to share these things with you in such a way of expense and everything that we can all enjoy them. But when it comes down to the professionalism-ship, I mean, forget it. It's not here. But I'm going to try to do the best job I can do for you in such a way as, you know, bringing to you my understanding about things and about the game in such a way as you can understand it. But I just want you to know now, this is going to come in such a way as storytelling. The chief and I was talking the other day, and he suggested that I tell stories about different events and different things that I want to, the subject that I want a video about. And I was suggesting maybe that I read the stories, you know, write the stories out and then read them instead of trying to tell them and everything. And he suggested that he believed that with the type of voice I have and the type of storyteller I am and everything, that it would be more entertaining and the people would enjoy it more if I would just tell the stories and get into storytelling and rehearse my lines in such a way as rehearse my stories and then to start in and do it in the way of storytelling. But he says I should also get the camera in such a way as get someone to operate the camera or get me some remote control pieces to be able to zoom in and zoom out and get different views instead of holding one view. And I thought that was, you know, he was right about that too. So I want to be getting some remote control devices over time, and I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to try to improve these videos where they won't be so amateurish in such a way as they'll be a little more interesting for you. But until the time gets here, I'm just going to do the best I can in a way of just making them and try to create as much interest as I can create for you. Playing some of these tapes and maybe show you some pictures and things and show you such things as these working collars and explain to you about conditioning and explain to you about different things. Just one story to the next story in such a way as, you know, like I say, I kind of feel like it'll be more entertaining and more enjoyable for you to view it by yourself in a way of seeing this as a one-on-one, you know, one-on-one video. But until I get that video, remote control equipment and everything, I'm going to take it, I'm just going to change the different scenes. Now y'all got to bear with me and understand this is just one dog man talking to another dog man in a sense of the way we're going to make these videos and the way we're going to get things across. I'm going to try a number of different things, answering questions and reading stories and talking about different stories and everything, but now that we're on the stories about conditioning, I'm gonna try reading some stories that I wrote about conditioning back in the 70s when I was conditioning a lot of dogs. But I want you to know now, you know, when I got into this game, it was just like anyone else when they got into the game. I mean, you know, it started out as blank, not knowing and having an understanding about anything. as to conditioning a dog and handling a dog and breeding the dogs, knowing the bloodlines, the families. I had no understanding whatsoever of none of this stuff. And I had to start out at point blank. And I had a number of different people to talk with, and I read every book I could find, every magazine I could get my hands on, just like you, in a sense of the ones that got to the point in the game where I've been. And it's, I had people like Earl Tudor to talk with, people like Frank Fitzwater to talk with, and the different ones that had been around for many years and everything. And talking to those people is like, now I look back and I say, wow, I wished I had more time with them, you know. I wished I could have asked them this, and I wished I could have asked them that and everything, you know. But when you're in your 20s and you're going strong, you do lots of, you know, things that you wished you would have done in a different way or did more of. But back in the 60s, I first got in the game. I had my first dog in 58, and I matched my first dog in 60. And it was, I had a job in town at that time where I worked. I'd go to work at 3 o'clock in the evening and work until 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning. So all the conditioning that I did was mostly at home, in the morning, I mean. You know, and I did that I worked those hours for 12 years. And in 1972, I quit that job and I started doing nothing but conditioning dogs and trying to survive on matching dogs and doing a number of different things, putting shows on, and just all in all, just making my living, my survival right out of the core of the game, dog game. And we conditioned lots of dogs back in those years. It was legal. There wasn't no laws against dog fighting. And they get you for a misdemeanor for cruelty to animals is about the best thing they'd do to you. And the matches was such as, in those years, we'd always have a fix with the sheriff in that county where we would match the dogs at. And the sheriff would usually sometimes be at pit side. And he's liable to be sitting there with the local banker, or the stable boy that worked the stables, the horse stables down the road. It was just a mixed group of people that was from every walk of life. It was at pit side in those years. And in the 70s, the game really got to going strong out here in Texas. It had reached a peak in this area because we was having big shows. And the laws just wasn't as strict out in this area as to, you know, letting you have fun and enjoying your life. In other words, they wasn't strict in bothering you at that time. And people would come from all over the United States. I mean, from nearly every state in the Union was represented. And some states might not have but 1 or 2 people that come out of that state. And other states would have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 come out of one state. And in some states, they would be people from different areas of that state that would join together and then all come out here at one time at these different shows. We'd have from 8 to 12 matches at the different shows. Some of the shows took place, they was 2-day shows. They would be in such as they'd have so many fights on Saturday evening or Saturday morning. Some shows we fought at night, and we would start the fights at night. But usually the shows that we fought at night, we would start at right before dark, and then go all the way through on up into the next morning. And it would be matches about 2 hours. They start about 2 hours before dark, or an hour before dark. We would match dogs all night long, and then on up into the next morning, sometime 1 or 2 o'clock the next day, before we'd be through. There'd be people here, like I say, from all over the United States, Mexico, Canada, and in the mid-70s, we was reaching 500 people at Pitside. And the conditioning that we was reaching for in those years was a peak conditioning that was like no other kind of conditioning the game had ever seen before. It was at a time when it was at a time when the competition was so strong that was going against one another. It was like a different era of the game. It wasn't like beginners going into beginners. It was like all of the people in the game at that time who were conditioners and handlers who matched the dogs in the pit, all of those people was like at a peak time in their area. They had all the knowledge from that area, and it was all within their understanding, and they was matching that area into the different areas throughout the United States. Like there would be some of the top conditioners from the West would represent the West, the top conditioners from the North would represent the North, the South, the Southwest, all over. And the dogs that they was using were dogs that was all close kin to one another. Many times they'd be half-brothers being matched into one another, and in those years. Sometimes there was sire going against his son, and dame and daughter matched into one another. Sisters matched into one another. Full brothers matched into one another. A whole lot of times cousins was matched into one another. As a matter of fact, well, there was sometimes that different dogs of altogether different families was matched into one another, that they wasn't all that close kin until they got back in there until about 5 or 6 generations back, and then they was kin to one another. But most everything was real close families in those years, and it was the best that the breeders in the United States had to offer at that time. The ones that was in the pit and using these dogs, they was using the best that the United States had bred at that time over the period of years that the game dogs has been here in the United States. And you're keeping up with these videos, you understand now how long the game dogs has been bred here in the United States. And how they have been proven in the pit in such a way as families is very close kin to one another. And then as we get on up to today's time, you will see the more outcross bred families that is in the game. It came about from an era of the late 70s on into 1990 now, in such a way that it's just been absolutely exploited like a bomb with newcomers that really didn't have an understanding of what they was doing and which way they was going, but they knew the direction, but they didn't know exactly how to go about it. And the dogs that's been dealt through that time have been dogs of every different kind of breeding that could be made. I mean, most all of it has been very outcross scatterbred, and they bred away from the way we was breeding the dogs in the 70s and before that for the pit. They have become such of an outcross scatterbred from the explosion of the last 10 years into the area of the people that just didn't have an understanding of what they was doing. I mean, you know, everybody's the same. The first 10 years, you don't really know where you're at. You're doing no more than just playing the game and trying to learn. That's the way it was with me. I was just playing the game and trying to learn about conditioning. The sport just exploded in me. I mean, you know, it was something that we did out here in this area just every weekend. I mean, you know, it was a sport that we really enjoyed playing in this area, the ones in this area that had the game dogs, and we involved ourselves in it every weekend in somewhere or another, some area or another around. And I had 2 different pits here on my place throughout the 60s and on into the late 70s before I had to take them down. But there would be people meeting here every weekend, and we'd be trying out dogs and involved in the game dogs and talking game dogs and everything. It was just more or less our life out in this area, the ones that flew with it. And this is the area where the shows really hit the peak time of the people that came to them, such as like 500 people at one show. And the largest number of them there from any area was from the Texas area. There's more Texas people there than in any other area. But there were people representing every state practically. And the level of understanding that was swapped back and forth and that was matched against one another and everything, it was really at a peak time. It was really something. I'm going to try to read some of the what I call the catmill keep. And it was the way I was conditioning the dogs in the mid-70s when I wrote it. And I'm going to try to read some of it here in a minute and see if we can get across in a way where you can understand where we was at in those years and the way we was conditioning our dogs from this area. And the competition was real strong. I'm talking the competition was real strong, and the money that the people would bet would be like, most people would bet what they could afford to bet in such a way as they'd bet everything they had on their dogs. A lot of them would bet what they didn't have to the part of where they'd let bills go to bet money on their dogs. That's the way the gambling was with the dog people. I mean, you know, when they set a dog down, they had lots of confidence in that dog, and they'd bet lots of money on that dog, and they'd bet more money on a dog of theirs than they would anything else of theirs. That's the way dogmen was. They really backed their dogs. And it was, like I say, some strong competition out in here, some real strong competition, and this is the reason that the game more or less peaked in this area as to the strong competition that was in this area. The very pure families from Earl Tudor's yard was bred in this area. In a way, they started becoming bred in this area in the 60s. They become more pure and more pure in this area. By the 1970s was here, and I had been in the game for 10 years, a little over 10 years. I had the purest of the purest families bred here in my yard at that time. But it was like, it took me 10 years to get to that point. And I spent many weekends driving to Earl Tudor's house and spending time with him and talking with him and everything to try to understand this family in a way of, you know, it's passed on to me in a way of a lineage. And we talked about conditioning many times while we was there. And like I say, nowadays I wished I would have asked him more questions, more direct questions about, you know, this or that and everything. But when you're in your 20s, first 10 years in the game or something, the questions that you asked are not near the same questions that you'd ask when you'd be 50. It's altogether a different ball game there. You've gone through a different era of life and everything, and you've proven your understanding in such a way as you wished you could have called it back and changed it and everything and created more understanding for yourself. But to be able to sit and talk to Earl Tudor, I'm telling you, hey, it was a thrill. When I look back over it, this man was so involved in the dogs. When he would go to telling a story, he would express himself so much when he would be telling that story about the dogs. He would just get you involved in it in such a way it was very much his life. He never had a job. He never worked a job. All he ever did was condition dogs and chickens and match dogs and chickens and do a little farming. He was a farmer. They're in Hobart, Oklahoma, and they raised potatoes, they raised peanuts, and they raised a number of different things. And he had 3 chicken pits on his property there, and he lived on a highway, one of the main highways that came through Hobart there, that traveled south and north. And they had some land there that they raised potatoes on, they raised peanuts on, and then he had that chicken pit that they would run every weekend. They would have it going every weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday, the chicken pits would be open. They'd fight chickens there on Saturdays and Sundays. And sometimes they would have dog fights there. And such as, Earl would tell me that most of the time, there'd be somebody show up one week, and they would try to get a match on, a dog match on, for the next week. But sometimes it would be made 4 weeks in advance, and 5 weeks in advance, and 6 weeks. I said, but a lot of times it would be made and just, you know, show up with a dog the next week at a certain weight, certain sex. And then he said other times there would be some people that would have a dog with them and trying to get Earl to match one of his dogs off the chain into him. Well, Earl said he always kept like 7 or 8 dogs ready at different weights for those kind of people. Those kind of people that just came up with the dog, you know, and said they wanted to match their dog for $20 or $30 or something like that. And Earl said they fought a lot of dogs back then for $25, which that was in the early 1900s. And $25, $30 was a lot of money back then. A lot of money back then, especially for those people in that area of Oklahoma. That was the area of the Okies in that area. And they're the people that, you know, the drought struck there to the part of where they wasn't able to pay nothing. They couldn't pay their taxes. They lost every bit of their land. They did everything. They had to pick up and leave and go to California, the most of them did, to survive. Well, Earl was one of the survivors. He was one that he survived from the dogs and the chickens and his hustling way of life. And he was a man that had more stories than you can imagine, telling you about the different events, you know, that happened in his life. And just real interesting to talk with. His knowledge of the dogs was just unbelievable. He had a way of talking about people in such a way as he read everybody. He had an understanding of people real fast. He'd meet them and wouldn't have a whole lot to do with them, and he'd know more about them than people that would know about them that knew them for years. He picked up on people that fast. And like I say, I don't know, but I doubt if he was educated. I doubt if he ever got out of grade school. I don't know, but he wasn't the type of a man that was like an educated man. He was a man that lived a lot of life and did a lot of dealing with people. He was, you know, operating 3 chicken pits there, and he always sold liquor. And bootleggers, we called them, bootleggers. But he made his money on hustle. In other words, he didn't go out and make his money in business. He made his money on hustle, just surviving from his understanding of life. When you get that man to talking, especially if he had a couple of good drinks of whiskey in him. Get him a few drinks of whiskey in him and get him to talking and telling stories about the old dogs. It was just, a man could just sit back and just listen and listen and listen for hours with him. It was really entertaining. And it's a shame that I didn't have such a thing as this video equipment in those years. to have been able to get that man down on video would have really been a, you know, oh me, that would have been nice. That would have been nice. But he could have carried on. Because when you're talking to someone like that, it's as if you only absorb so much of it until you miss lots of it. And when you have a record, such as a video, or such as these tapes that I was showing you earlier, and pictures and stories written in magazines and books and everything, which you can constantly research in it to absorb an understanding of truth. It's a little different than just conversation and then store all that in your memory to the part of being able to bring it out years later. That's why I want to read some of these stories that I wrote about conditioning back in the 70s in such a way as this was wrote at the time when I was right involved in it real deep. I'd be working as many as 10 dogs at one time on a cat mill here. And as most all of you know, I'm sure, a cat mill is such a machine that works a dog. Earl Tudor and Frank Fitzwater, they had a little knowledge about. Frank Fitzwater didn't have much knowledge about a cat mill, but Earl Tudor had a whole lot of knowledge about a cat mill. He really taught me some things about a cat mill. But Frank was a man that he never did get an understanding of the cat mill. He never did get it to where that he could overcome it. And Earl did. Earl fixed his cat mill up in a way of where that he dug out a deep trench. And I've got a picture of his cat mill here. Let's see if we can see it. This is it right here. This is his cat mill. Now it's made out of wood, and I want to try to get this up there and see if you can get a good shot of it. As you can see, it's made of wood, and he dug a track around and dug it deep, and then he banked the sides with cottonseed hull and would mix it in with the sand and let it rot. And it was sandy country up in that part of the area. And he would let it rot. And he built a bank where the dogs, when they worked it, they would go up on the side when they'd be running, and when they'd walk, they'd go back down in the track when they'd be circling it. And the cat mill is built back then, as you can see. His was built on the hub of a wagon hub is what the frame of it was. And that's the same way with Frank Fitzwater's. His was built on he used the whole wagon wheel, a big wagon wheel, and had a wagon hub here. And then he built out off of that wheel. But Earl's was a wagon hub, and it was built with the boards that sort of went out in a Y and everything. They had some cross bracing on it and everything. Well, when I got into it, I used a 49 Ford rear end out of an automobile. Sunk it down into the ground and dug it in, took it all the way down to the hub part, to the part that led off to the drive shaft, the bell housing, I think they called it, the center bell housing. I took that all the way down to the ground level, just a little above the ground level, that bell housing in the center. And then I had a wheel onto my rear end up here, and I had a wheel at the bottom, and I sunk all that in concrete. And dug a big hole and sunk it all in concrete with reinforced steel to hold that real strong and real steady. But what I did, I came off of that hub with angle iron, and I run mine out there 20 feet. And Earl's was run out there somewhere around 20 feet. maybe not quite 20 feet, but I run mine out there 20 feet, and then I took and dug a track, like Earl told me, and sunk the track and everything, and fixed it up with a drain and everything in case it rained. And I built the track up where the dog could work on the sides of it when he got to going fast. Well, now that was all through the 60s. And the 60s was at a time, well, it seemed like an era of time where technology was changing, where that you could take something of the old and redo it in a new way and really gain. And that's what I was doing. In other words, they didn't have angle iron and the welding machines and all of that to be able to put together a meal like I had there in the 60s, and I was able to do in the 60s. Of course, at that time, Earl hadn't conditioned a dog there on his place in over 20-something years. And so he wasn't, you know, wanting to redo his in such a way as going into the technology end of it. Throughout the 60s, I conditioned all my dogs on that cat meal that had like 20 feet from the center. It was like 40 feet across from one track to the other track. When the 70s began, I went and I picked out a different area for my cat meal, and I picked an area that had just a little slight hillside on it, very slight hillside. And I put me a rear end in there, and I got 2-inch pipe, and I believe it was 2 inch, it might have been 1 3/4, but it was a good sized steel pipe, and it was in 20-foot sections. And I built the cat meal in such a way as I built both sides exactly alike, out of the exact same material, so that the balance of the meal was even. On one side it weighed the same, on the other side. I didn't use a counterbalance. I made both sides the same way. And at the end of the arms, I built them in such a way as I took and made a Y. I made a Y, such as that. And at the Y, the space between the end of the Y, oh, it must have been at least eight feet. 8 feet from one end to the other end of the Y that was like this, and then it went all the way back to the center. That was the way both ends of it was. Well, it was, my track was 57 feet from one side to the other side. It made it somewhere like 20-something feet, 27 feet, 28 feet, somewhere around in that, from the center out to the track. And then I had bracing off of the hub that the pipes was built onto. I had a post, a 2-inch pipe that went straight up for 5 feet. And then from that pipe, I came off of it. I hope I'm not getting out of the way here. I came off of that pipe that came straight up off of the wheel. In other words, the hub of the cat meal. I came up off of that with a 5-foot pipe. Went straight up, 2 inches. Now welded is there. Then I come off of that pipe with some angle iron that went off this pipe, and it went all the way out like that to each arm at the same place, and welded all that together. And then I welded like the arms, like one arm was up here with a Y here, and it come down to the center here, and then it went down here, and another Y down here. Well, I had a piece here in the center. This would be like you'd be looking down on top of it. A piece here in the center that went out, I think it might have been 10 foot. 10 foot wide, it went out this way. And it was a 2-inch pipe, and it went out each side. Well, from those, I took and put cable on this end of the Y, at this part of the root of the Y, and I went from there to the 10-foot pipe, and then on down to the other end in such a way as it was braced by cable from sides like that. and it held it from the sway motion. And I was able to create a machine that run real smooth, just real smooth. It's unbelievably smooth, just freewheeling. You could just give it just a twist and it would sit there and just creep around, just creep around. It was so well balanced and everything. I had it on a slide heel, just a slide heel like so, where that when the dogs, on one of the Ys, which was out on the end, I had a chain, a small chain approximately this high. The Ys was up off of the ground on the low end. The arms would be up off of the ground, say 4.5 foot. Well, the chain was like a couple of feet down. In other words, it would always be just long enough that as the dog came on the deep end, on the down end, the chain would start to get a little tight. And then as he walked on up, it would start getting looser and looser until he got up the top end. And then the Y that held the chain, it would be right over the dog's head usually. It wouldn't be no higher than that, like this, when the meal was at the top end. But when it was at the low end, it would be from here to the floor in such a way as about 4.5 feet. And the dogs would work that meal. There's just all kinds of ways of getting a dog to work that. You've got to train a dog to work a cat meal in such a way as you don't want a dog to run a cat meal. You train them in such a way as they walk it in a dog walk, a dog trot. And as you first start teaching a dog how to work a cat meal, you usually use some bait, such as if you've got a dog that'll work a hide, use no more than a hide. And if he won't work a hide, you get you a small pen and put a cat in it. Most dogs will work a cat, or a coon, or a rabbit, or something live that will create the dog's energy to, go for the prey. Well, as you learn a dog to do that, you never want to let a dog just knock his lights out on one of them and just get so hot he can't stand up, because they will do it when you go to putting bait in front of them. What you do is you just get them to learning how to go around there. Just learning how to go around there, so when they finally get their footage down and can really run it, that's when you just leave them on so long and then take them off. And I'm talking about a minute, 2 minutes, that's all. You don't leave them on there 5 or 10 minutes. We're talking about a big circle where a dog is really moving. I'm talking about really moving. He's running all out when he first learns to work it. So you don't want them at that time to get real hot and to even come close to wanting to slow down. You just want them to make so many sure get their footage down and everything and get wild to get it. Then you take them off of the meal, leave your bait on the meal, and you pull them, and let them get work to get to the meal. Keep pulling them back and everything. And you drag them away on their lead rope in such a way as you take them back and let them want it, let them want it, let them want it. And you mess with their head and get it to the part where that they really enjoy working. And you, as the way I used to like to do it would be, if I had to use a bait, I would use a coon or something live like that, and then I would take and hang a milk jug, a plastic milk jug, onto that arm where the bait's at, and onto a rope, and let it hang down and bounce on the ground right in front of the dog in such a way as the dog couldn't get to it, but it would just bounce different directions, and it kind of keep that dog's attention, that gallon milk jug bouncing around on the ground in front of him there, keep his attention. And he's looking at the live too, and then running it and everything. And then about the second or the third day, you take the animal, the varmint or whatever you have, the bait, you take that out of the cage. and you let him work just the jug and the little cage pen. And then the next day, you take the cage pen off and let him work nothing but the jug. And you do them the same way. You work them slow until you let them get where they work a little bit more and a little bit more day in and day out. But you don't ever let them hit that real heat period there. You take them off before they do that, while you're training them to work a cat mill. Once you get them to working the jug, that's when you want to get them to working where they can work through their heat period. And once they start working that jug, they'll get to where when you put them on there, they'll really run it. And then they'll go to slowing down a little. And when they slow down a little bit, that's when you want to take them off with the jug on there. Then you want to get the jug, the rope, everything off, and put the dog back on it, and let him work it without the jug. See if you can get him to work it without the jug, or just leave him on the cat mill and take the jug off, and don't let him try to keep it hid from him when you take it off, in other words. But get the dog to work in the cat mill as soon as you can, without no bait in front of him, without nothing in front of him. And in that way, when the dog starts working the mill, he'll generally just bust into a run. And then he'll slow down into a walk, a trot. And it's as if he just gets his mind focused on nothing but getting to where he's going in a fast trot. And he's just like he has an odd look on his face, like an animal would have that would just be out in the field in that fast walk. It's just an odd look on their face. They're really not focused in on anything, but their body's just working in a way their legs are just in that dog trot. And as the dog works that over time, they'll get to where they will. You work them on up into hours. When now, if I was to look back and rewrite this conditioning keep and tell it the way that I would do it today, and talk about conditioning one dog for one match, as to the way I was conditioning then, at the time when I wrote this, I would be conditioning 10 different dogs for 10 different matches. Some of them would be set to come off in a week, some of them be set to come off in 3 weeks, some of them be set to come off in 6 weeks, whatever. All different times. And that each dog would be at a different stage of their keep. And I was averaging working, well, when I was really working the most dogs, I wasn't even working a job. But when I got to the part of where I started working those more dogs and more dogs, I started working less and less at the hotel where I worked in Dallas. And till 72, where I just quit the hotel and come out here and did nothing but condition dogs. And at that time, it was like working dogs, oh, we say 20 hours a day. Be working dogs 20 hours a day. There'd be lots of times I'd be come up here and sleep for an hour or two. You know, with certain dogs I could do that with. I'd come up here and sleep for a while and everything, and then I'd go back down and work with the dogs and everything, and just changing them around and everything. But be working with them all hours, all hours. We would shut it off for 2 hours in the heat of the day, and we would shut it off real early in the morning, somewhere around 3 in the morning, and till about 5 in the morning. We'd start up again about 5 in the morning. And it was a lot of hours, The amount of conditioning that we was putting on the dogs, the amount of dogs that was matching at that time around here was, I believe, I matched over 50 dogs. I think it was over 50 dogs I matched in the 70s. And I mean, you got to imagine to the party where your mind is constantly on what you're doing. You're mixing feed for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different dogs that's got to be fed different. In a sense that where a dog gets fed a certain way at 2 weeks in front of his match, a dog gets fed another way at 6 weeks in front of his match. The feed kind of changes as the conditioning changes, and the dog's body starts taking different degrees. And you change your feed and put your body to a different point level. And you really got to get psyched out in such a way as get your concentration really involved in what you're doing to be able to be successful at it. And in the 1970s, I'm telling you, I had them all scratching their heads. They was all scratching their heads as to the kind of conditioning that I was showing up with at Pitside. I remember that snake dog when I fought him, when I matched him in 76 or so, somewhere in that area, maybe 75, I forget exactly when it was, but I had that dog in such standout conditioning that anyone could see it just by looking at the dog. They'd say they'd never seen a dog that looked like that was conditioned to that point, you know. You could just look at the dog, the way the dog was on his toes, and the look the dog had out of his body, the whole thing, the way his body just appeared and everything. All the conditioners were just standing back and saying, man, I ain't ever seen nothing like that. In other words, it was a good feeling, but they had picked up on it. As soon as I got the dog in the pit, Maurice Carver was trying to bet 4-1, and then Don Maloney started on the other side of the pit trying to bet 5-1. That was the odds that they was laying just before the fight. It come from conditioning. There wasn't nobody knew that snake dog. They didn't know nothing about it. Nobody knew what I had at all. I was one of the only ones that knew what I had. And they seen that conditioning, and they reacted to that conditioning, and I had been showing up with this kind of conditioning more and more and more and more over my years. I just kept getting it a little stronger and a little stronger and a little higher peak and a little higher peak. I had a little house down here on where my cat mill was built down in my pasture there. And I had a little house that was about 10 foot by 10 foot, somewhere like that, and the whole front of the house, it sat on the high side of the cat mill. It sat on the high side, and the whole front of it I had with windows. In other words, I had some big windows running long ways where that you could oversee the cat mill, and then I had a light pole up that shined and lit the whole thing up at night. And I had radio, I had TV, I had my telephone, and I had a rubbing table in there, and I had a wood stove in there. And that's where I would stay all the time working my dogs. And people was calling here from all over the country at that time, wanting to talk dogs and talk conditioning and everything. When I was really going at that time in the early mid-70s there, Maurice Carver was calling. He called an average of 5 times a week and talk at least an hour each phone call while I'd be working dogs. And Maurice Carver would have 100 questions about conditioning and everything on the cat mill. And Maurice Carver was the man. Maurice had never worked a conditioned a dog on a cat mill. He was always a treadmill and table conditioner. And he put dogs on some road work also, and hand walking. But he was never a cat mill conditioner. But when I was really making a success with the cat mill, Maurice was phoning real regular, and he built him one. And he changed the name from cat mill to Jenny. Well, jenny is what they use for a horse worker, a horse walker. That's a jenny. They named it jenny because they would take a jenny, which is a donkey, female donkey, and they would put it onto the horse walker that had a number of different arms with horses on each one, and that jenny would just constantly move and walk, and that would make the horses walk. But without a jenny, a lot of the horses wouldn't walk. So when they used a jenny and walked the horses, they named that a jenny. Well, Maurice named his cat meal a jenny. And a lot of people in the game today still don't know the difference between a cat meal and a jenny, and they call it jenny because Maurice come up with that name. But the cat meal got its name from the fact that cats was the main bait that the different conditioners used to work their dogs with, to train their dogs to work. That's what how it got its name. They put a house cat in a pen, and it really taught a dog to work. Well, over the years, like I say, the conditioning got more and more to a peak because I devoted more time to it and more trying to understand what I was doing and how to repeat myself in such a way as I could do a better job of it and work on this end and that end, and how to work on this part of the body, how to work on the jaws, how to work on the back and the neck, just, you know, every part of the dog's body had to be focused in on and concentrated on to develop to its peak point, to be able to compete in those years. And that's what I'm talking about when I said, you know, hey, competing in those 70s was like the game had never seen before. Now, I believe the 90s will come about, it will see an era that is a much stronger era than the 80s has been. The 80s has been a conditioning method that has come out of a younger generation of the game. It came in such a way as in the 60s, a number of different things started coming out, such as choice vitamins that really has a purpose, you know, that works on a different area of the body, and concentrated pill form. 60s was the time when people was opening their minds up to the value of herbs, to the value of food, to the value of different things in life that worked on their body. The 60s was the time that when, well, let me put it this way. The President of the United States and his wife was on amphetamines. The largest part of society in their teens to their 30s was taking diet pills. An amphetamine that, you know, really geared them up in the way of cocaine, the same thing. It's an upper in such a way as the in the 60s when I was working at the hotel, I was the front doorman at the front door, and they had 2 large clubs in the hotel. And we got some top entertainment there. This hotel was like 20 years ahead of its time. It was a hotel that was built with Teamsters money, And it was the same chain, the same builder, the same developer, the same design and everything that designed Caesar's Palace. Caesar's Palace opened up after this hotel where I worked up opened up. And the people that I got involved in and contact with day in and day out in those 10 or 12 years there was people from every area of life, from every walk of life. It was coming in and out that front door going to those clubs. And the people of the 60s was a lot, very open-minded. And they was into a number of different things of trying to understand what this does and what this does. In other words, everything was like new to them. Well, George Sadler in those years, he brought in a vet there in Cleveland, Mississippi with the drug called Azium. Azium was such a drug that it came out in those days that if you was out here in an automobile and you crashed into a brick wall and you just mangled yourself, you just busted every bone in your body, every blood vessel in your body, everything, you just mangled yourself and all you was barely hanging on, the first thing they'd put in you would be Azium. And this would keep you from going into shock. And it would tighten your arteries and it would tighten your blood veins. It would just pull them together to the part of where that it would keep your blood pressure up. It would keep the blood flow through your body with a stronger pressure, with a higher red blood count. Well, the vets got a hold of this Azium, and it wasn't long, you know, the game dog people, they was up on everything that was happening through the vet. Most of them who were conditioners and handlers and the ones that matched their dogs, they was, I can remember many a times when I would go to the vet, I would tell him what I would want done to my dog, you know, and what kind of drugs I was wanting to use on the different things, different parts of what I wanted done to the dog and how I wanted him to go about doing it. Sometimes some of those vets would just started looking at me real strange as if to say, you know, well, where did you come up with that at, you know? Who in the world told you to do something like that or something? But most game dog people were that type of people. They had a lot of knowledge about veterinarian type work and doctoring work and the different organs on the dog, the different mechanism of the body, in other words. And George had this dog called Bullet, and he had him matched into Jerome Hernandez in the early 60s there, and George was a man that he put a lot of work on a dog, a lot of work on the dog. Well, the dog broke down in his last week, and George was the type of a man that he didn't give a dog rest. He worked the dog right up to like 2 days in front of the match, and that was it. He would go with him, you know, he'd work and condition him up to 2 days in front. He didn't give him very much rest. I'm sure he probably cut down more than what he let people know he did. But back in those days, everybody didn't let everybody know exactly everything they did with the dogs when they're conditioning them. But George brought this vet to the pit side with him, and all he did was tell him stories about how his dog was sick, and you know, he didn't know if he was going to let the dog go into the pit and this and that and everything. Right there at pit side where everybody could see, they give the dog a shot of Azium. And this was right before the dog was weighed in and washed. And the dog was the type of a dog that he was a spirited type of dog that looked like he was hunkered down all the time. He looked like he just hunkered down and looking out of the tops of his eyes this way around. He was that type of a dog. And when he laid his ears back, he was a dangerous dog. He'd bite anybody if he laid his ears back. This dog come out of Alabama by some guys that had him up there, and he was a biting dog. He'd been known to bite lots of people. And they fought him first up in Alabama, and then George Sadler got a hold of him, and he went 2 or 3 matches. But anyway, they take this bully dog, and they give him a shot of Asian for the fight. Well, he was the bottom dog, and he just didn't have no strength in him. He just didn't have no strength in him. But he would come to the top. Every time the other dog would let up, he would come to the top and go to walking around, you know, and you could see that he was on the weak side, but still yet, this dog never took one deep breath. He never took one deep breath. And the other dog, Jerome Hernandez had, it was a bad dog. It was a good dog, big, strong, black dog. It was a real good dog. And it put everything he could on that bullet dog that George Sadler had, but he had that A's in him. And it came around there to the black dog. He had just reached a point of where he finally got so hot and so weak that he went down. And when he did, the old bullet dog just came up. Still hadn't took a deep breath. He was still as weak, and he was still in the same kind of condition he was at the 3-hour mark as he was when he started. He never did get no weaker, and he never did get no stronger. He was that way all the way through the fight. But when Jerome's dog got so weak and so hot, and then cooled off and then got weak, he got too hot. But when he cooled off, he started getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and he finally just went on down. And when he went on down, the red dog come on up, and he stayed on top and win. Well, it just shocked everybody. Everybody just, you know, amazed at that dog, the way he didn't take one deep breath. Everybody was going nuts. George, what kind of shot? What was in that shot? What was in that shot? Everybody was looking for something, you know. Everybody was wanting to have an understanding of. Back in those days, the people that was giving shots was using B12 liver and iron. And they would give it on a schedule of like 5 days in front of a match. They'd give it, and then they'd skip a day, then they'd give it, then they'd skip a day, and then they'd give it at match time. And you got a dog cycle peaking as they give it. And it was, you know, it had its purpose in those years when, you know, everything was of that nature. But in the 70s, on in the later 60s there, this was in around mid-60s when this was, or early 60s is when this was. And so I found out, you know, I got the name of it right quick, ASIM. Well, I started experimenting with it and trying the different things. Well, at this time was when I believe it was the East Germans at that time in the different Olympics and different sports events, they was starting to fool with hormones and blood packing, what we call blood packing. And that was to take blood out and then inject it in before the event. Well, what we're trying to do in those 60s was, like I say, it was a time when people was much real open-minded. I'm not going to say more open-minded than they are now, but they're very open-minded today and time. We all know that. But the drugs was being introduced in such a way as where everybody had 2 or 3 prescription bottles in their glove box and their medicine cabinets, and some of them carried them in their pockets and in their purses. Everything was legal, everything was, you could just get a number of things from a veterinarian, and there wasn't no doctor that you couldn't go and get what you wanted from. And we was experimenting with all these different things, and the dog men was really using them. The horse men was also using them. Well, I started mixing what are called hormones. It wasn't called testosterone at that time. It was called hormones. I mean, it wasn't called steroids at that time. It was called hormones, and the main brand then was testosterone. It was something to do with the ingredients and the main brand, but it was male hormones is what it was. Well, over a period of time, we put together by trying the different, trying to understand everything and experimenting to a party where we found out that using Asium, it would take a dog and keep them breathing very cool, very cool. What it did, it concentrated the blood down to the part where it took the water out of the blood, and it tightened the veins, and it put a dog on a very red blood cell high count. A high red blood cell count is what it did. This kept a dog cool. But it also sapped the energy from the adrenaline gland. Asium would sap the energy from the adrenaline gland. So therefore we had to find something that would balance it out, that would build the adrenaline back in the adrenaline gland and concentrate the blood too. So what I put together with the Asium, I got in with a man that was, he worked off of a government grant in animal research, and he was in Alaska at this time. And he used to call quite a bit. I have a number of different tapes that I talked to him for several hours, and we would be discussing all these different drugs. And he was working on animal life with the government in the form of sea life, sea world animals, the sharks, the turtles, all these different, and he was involved with experimental drugs with these animals. And he was trying to explain to me about the different drugs and everything, and I was telling him what I wanted. I was telling him what I was using and what I wanted. So this is when we come up with the hormones to balance out, to build the adrenaline glands, and the Asium to control the blood in such a way as keeping them cool. Well, then we also blended that with the vitamin shot of B12, liver, and iron. Well, when we started using that, it started the game in such a way as everybody started using different things. The word started spreading quick, you know, about this one's using this and this one's using that. This kind of shots are being used, this kind of shots and everything. But nobody really knew exactly what each other was doing. But they all started trying to find out from each other in such a way as everybody was experimenting and everybody was trying to learn more about it. And I taught a number of them the combination of shots that I was using. I taught Raymond Holt how to use it. I taught Butch House how to use it. I taught Bobby Hall how to use it. I told Roland Fontenot about how to use it. Danny Burton, Jackson, Vernon Jackson, just a number of them. I taught them how to use it in such a way as the ingredients and the schedule in such a way as where they took it from there and then they went on and experimented into a further area of different things and whatever. In other words, but they more or less had the blend of combinations. It's not like you could use one thing. You have to use a blend of combinations to get this. Well, nowadays the conditioners, from what I understand, the conditioners are taking and they're giving steroid shots on a basis of, you know, so many during the keep and then at the end, but they're not blending it with too many different things, and some of them they tell me they're blending it together. But it's the amount of conditioning, when those shots came in, what it did to the game, it took a man, a conditioner that was not a peak conditioner, and it was able to correct his conditioning and put his conditioning to a much higher level of conditioning than he was ever able to do before. Those shots could take conditioners that didn't know nothing at all about conditioning. If they just get out there and walk a dog and get it healthy and put so much exercise on it and then give him those shots so many days and everything and give them the shots through each match, and their conditioning would be even better than it would be when they was working the dog real strong and everything. In other words, those shots made conditioners out of people that wasn't conditioners. In other words, they really didn't have an understanding to be able to put a dog into a good peak. But with the shots, it gave them such conditioning that they could overcome anybody else that wasn't using those shots unless they was a peak conditioner. Only the peak conditioners was the only ones that had a chance against those shots without those shots. The mediocre conditioners, they didn't have a chance against going into the people that was using those shots. I mean, you know, they just didn't have a chance. The only ones that could compete with them and overcome them was the people, the conditioners that could put a dog on a real high level of conditioning. Now, the cat meal key, it is a conditioning method that I worked out to the part of being able to put a dog on a very high level of conditioning. This level of conditioning, it works in such a way as the shots can't compete with this. The body is in such tremendous conditioning, such peaked out areas of the body in such ways as each portion of the body is fully developed and has been conditioned for this peak. Now see, that's not done with the people that's using the shots. They're not going to this extreme. The ones that use the shots don't. So, when I spent my years in such a way, let's see here. Like I say, over the years of conditioning, I've got more focused in on what I was doing and how I was trying to go about doing it. But to hit a real peak conditioning, it works in such a way as you, those shots, they do something that you're trying to do when you're conditioning. In other words, you're trying to put the dog's body to the peak performance area where those shots, they balance that body out to reach that peak area too. To show you an example now of what I'm talking about, you got to understand about the red blood cells, red blood count. And when you have a dog on a high red blood count, their blood circulates in such a way as it will keep the body from ever getting hot. And the cooler you can keep the body, the stronger it will be as endurance comes in. But if the body gets a little too hot, when it cools off, it'll become weak. But if it doesn't ever reach that particular heat period, that heat area there, that makes the body become weak, then the body will stay cool and be strong all the way through. So what you're trying to create is a high red blood cell count. And this is what the Asium does. But when you learn how to dehydrate a dog and how to peak a dog towards the end, you concentrate that dog's blood in such a way as you dilute the water out of it through the amount of water that you give the dog. You take control of the water in such a way as you start putting that dog on a peak in the last so many days of the conditioning. And what that does, it tightens up the arteries in the blood veins, and it dilutes the water out of it, and it concentrates the blood to the part of where that it will pack more red blood cells there, and they travel through the body to the lungs, through the liver, heart area, throughout the body to the part of where the blood breathes oxygen through the lungs and circulates it back through the body, and it keeps the body cool. But when the body don't have those high red blood counts, it gets too hot. To understand this, a lot of people, where I first picked up on it and really got a little more understanding about it, it was when we knew what we was going after. But we didn't know exactly how to create it. You know, we knew how to go about it and everything, but we didn't know exactly how to create it, where the area was at that time. It was more or less, sometimes we would have it right there, and other times we'd be off. But we had the understanding of it to be able to have the dogs real close to right all the time, to understand. Like you might condition 10 dogs back then, and one of them you'd hit a peak with. You'd have that blood formula right. You would have everything right to where that dog would just breathe so cool. That dog would be strong all the way through. And boy, I'm telling you, it would give you a sense of understanding and proudness as if you had really accomplished something. And it was just like playing golf. You was really anxious to hit the ball on the next hole. You know, the golf player, every time he hits a real good shot, he'll just almost run down to the ball to hit it again. Until he hits a bad shot, and then he'll walk down there. Sort of the way it was in conditioning dogs. In a way, when you really hit that peak, you just couldn't wait for the next one. And you really thought you knew what to do right then. And we would hear a lot of the conditioners, they would say, if this match would have only been for last week or 2 weeks ago, my dog was so perfect, he was so right at that point and everything. But now I don't know what's happened to him now, he's just way off. That used to be a story that was real common around Pittside. It was real common to hear that story. And it was true. Lots of times it was true. Most of the time it was true. It was true to the point of where that the conditioners could see it by looking at the other dogs, to the part of where they could focus in and spot the ones that was right and which ones wasn't right. Well, when all these shots started coming in, it changed a lot of that insight. It changed a lot of it because it changed so much of the dogs. In other words, you just had to be able to get a little deeper with your understanding to be able to read the dogs and know and understand the game and what's happening in the game. And you know, that's the way you're going to be betting your money in such a way is that you don't pay attention, you lose out real quick. Lose out real quick, especially back in those days when the game was such at a point of where it was at. But the way I understood it, the way I really got a hang of what was happening, was when I would take a dog in for a checkup to get a blood count. Take the dog to get the blood count on the dog, to find out where my red cells, my white cells, and where the blood count was at. And I've noticed sometimes, you know, the dog would have a real high red blood cell count. And another time it'd have a real low blood count. And we was talking about the same dog, you know, just in a period of time there. And so I started paying a little more attention and doing a lot more reading and a lot more research and paying more attention as to the way the dog was responding from water. As to the hours the water had been put into him. I took control of the water, and the only water the dogs would get would be that water that I would give them. And I kept them confined without water, and I started doing it with water. And I found out that I could go 8 hours. I could go 24 hours without the dog having any water. The dog could go 24 hours without having any water, and I could take that dog to the vet, and he would have a real high red blood count, a real strong red blood count, showing real high. Be just right where I'd want it. And then I'd take the dog back home. 2 or 3 days later, I would give the dog water, say, an hour before I went to get the blood check count. And when I'd have the blood check count, it would be a very, very low red blood cell count. Very, very low. So, you know, that common sense don't make no difference where you're from. You can understand that. And you know, the water and the dehydration of the water in the blood will do the same job that the azium does. Do the same job as the azium will do. And then your adrenaline gland is not sapped empty to the point of where that it needs the hormones. See? So therefore, then you don't need any shots. You basically use the vitamins in building the body, and you conditioning the body in all the different points of the body, different areas of the body. You concentrate on a certain work for that area of the body. And you build each area of the body equally in such a way as it, with the food and with the different types of work and everything, to the part of where that it all comes together, and then the last 5 days before the match, you peak that body in such a way as you take control of the water. You take control of the water. Up until that point, water is, the dog has control of his own water to drink the amount that he wants to drink up to a certain point. If the dog starts drinking too much water, more than what he should have in that area of time, you have to start really concentrating on this in the area of somewhere around 2 to 3 weeks in front of a match. You have to really watch the dog in such a way as determining how much water he's drinking, how much he's not drinking, and when the water should be in front of him and when it shouldn't be in front of him. Such as when a dog in front of the dog's conditioning work that he's put on when he starts his daily conditioning work, he should have the water away from him at least 2 hours before then. A good 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours before he's to start his conditioning. He shouldn't have one lap of water. You could take it away from him. Start his work for his conditioning. He shouldn't have any water. In other words, you don't want a dog to stick his head in a water bucket and stand over a water bucket and lap his belly full, and then 30 minutes or an hour later get out there and work. His red blood count is going to be so down that he's going to get hot. And then after he gets so hot, he's going to get weak. And so what you want to do, you want to do the same thing in your daily conditioning as you do when you peak the dog for the match at match time in a cycle. In such a way as you want to keep the dog, you want to get that dog, like say, 3 hours in front. But at match time, you don't get water for 24 hours in front of a match. You keep water away from him for 24 hours, unless it is a dog that is a little bit too far dehydrated, and you've got to bring him back some. Then he's to drink a little more. But it's just a degree more to get him to the right point. But a dog that's right, in other words, he should be with that water for 24 hours. And then in the 24-hour period of time, he's going to hit such a high peak with a high blood count. He's just going to be up on his toes, and his body is going to be, it's going to be just in a quiver state. In a quiver state. The dog will be so alert that any movements made around the dog, such as just an object move out of the cover, the dog will just move in that fashion when he's to the peak that you're looking for in the game dogs. And this is a point of conditioning that is the ones that gives those shots, they don't find this conditioning that I'm talking about. It's got to be put in a dog in such a way as like you keep that water out of them for 3 hours. Sometimes it can't quite be 3 hours. It's got to be a little closer, sometimes be a little further. But when they go to working, you want them to work cool enough that they can continue to work much longer and develop their body in such a way as their body don't get hot and weak while they're doing it. They put the amount of work onto their body that makes them get much more to that point than they would be able to get if they got hot and then cooled off and got weak, and then their work wouldn't be the same, see. So you got to you peak a dog in a cycle of 7-day cycle each week. Now, if we're going to talk about when, back in the days in the 70s, 60s when I was working so many dogs, we're talking about we wouldn't match one for less than a 6-week period of time. We always try to want more than 6 weeks to put a dog right. But there was times when we didn't have a full 6 weeks. And there was times when we'd have 3 months on some of them. I conditioned some dogs that I conditioned for a year straight, and then matched them. Went to pit with them. Oh, the conditioning that was on them was unbelievable.